sorry. So what we usually do is we take questions. I would say, since we also have to designate a time for our own open discussion, let's say like half an hour. So I hope the question and answer would go for not more than like half an hour, let's say, so we can finish 9:45 or something like that. Just hold your hands up so I can actually write your names down. I'll just start here with Kamran.
Thank you so much for that great presentation. I'm so glad that you ended with Heidegger, because I was just thinking about it when I couldn't ask this question without it.
Okay.
Because if you know, the common feeling among the replicants was angst, because they knew, before anybody else, they knew they were going to die.
Yeah.
And it evokes the Heideggerian notion that the authentic living was being unto death. That came up. But then again, you brought up a lot of other interesting things. The relationship between Rachel and Decker, and the role that Ray plays in evoking some kind of a consciousness in them, which brings us to ask this question. Roy does a weird thing. He crucifies himself.
Yeah.
He does put the nail in his palm. So here's Ridley Scott's critique, I think, because obviously he's against progress. In his later works, he shows so much attraction to the ancient history, medieval history, the ethics of hero in Gladiator, the ethics of warrior in the Kingdom of Heaven, most of them all with dignified understanding of the opposite sex love, not the sexism that we saw here. That's obviously his critical point. But my point is, in that act that he does, it's as if the crucifier and the crucified are always the same. So ideologies defeat themselves. Weird scientific paradigms will cause their own demise. Capitalism will defeat itself. Religion destroys itself. So this whole thing about this morbid thing about it brings us to then what is to get out of it? Because we live in a critically political time. And the way that I see it from my own perspective, the audit game was like an immigration refugee kind of interview. So you would be an artificial citizen. Not the dichotomy of the biological human beings and an engineered human, but you're an engineered citizen, and you have a lifespan. There are certain lines that you cannot pass. If you do, we'll take it away from you, and you could go back to the element. And why do you go to this? You mentioned the notion of white flight and substitution. So there is, in the labor force, there's a white flight there too. So we need people to pick the grapes in France and do the labor work in Spain, and then they could, or in U.S. with the Mexican laborers, and then they would never have a certain equal citizenship or equality in the case. In the face of all these angst, I think that the Heideggerian point that you made, to just sum it up, brings about the idea that care is absolutely absent. How care is generated? Because why do we need this care? Care is generated ultimately, in my opinion, with an interaction between Decker and Rachel. Because Decker tries to teach Rachel, say that you love. In a weird film noir thing, it seems like as if he's aggressive toward her. We thought maybe she would be assaulted, but it wasn't. It takes a radical act to experience love or to teach love. That was obviously Ridley Scott's point in that period, because later he has a more humble, human, dignified understanding of that. So ultimately, it is the love that could cure all these messes, in my opinion, what he says. Just your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask, can I also, is there someone have a pen I could borrow as well? Because I know I'm going to get, I just want to be able to jot down some things. I'm hearing all these, you know.
You can just borrow one and I'll get it for you.
Is that okay if I use
Sure.
that? So thoughts on the idea that care, love is something that, well, I think that's central to this in the sense that there's this deficit that exists. And the problem with love and care is that it's something that is not quantifiable. Right, it's something that cannot be, it's something that cannot be measured in the sense like the Voight-Kampff tries to measure empathy, right? And so I think these things are all linked. Empathy, obviously, you need to empathize in a certain way to be able to feel compassionate, and you need that to actually care, right? And then love is affiliated with that. So on one level, it might sound, it's sort of like the Beatles. All you need is love, right? It might sound a little simplistic, but there's a genuine absence of affect, right, of feeling in the film. And the thing is, that's where you said this is a critical time. We are there now. We've been there for a while. We are constantly, politically, politicians in the United States, Canada, Europe, playing different groups off of each other. And so the attitude is that that is allowed to be perpetuated because of this deficit that exists, a lack of solidarity, you know. And so getting to what you said about Rachel and Deckard, it's important because I like what you said about the initial love scene, the love scene that almost looks like a rape scene, as you said, right? It looks like it's going in that direction. And I think it is supposed to be presented, like it is supposed to jar us a little bit, it's supposed to be aggressive, because it contrasts with what happens at the end. And so one of the, I think it was Barr, I think it was in the reading that you guys can take a look at after if you have time. She points out that at the beginning, Deckard is in a hierarchical position over Rachel, right? At the end, he's in an equal position. Now, not just because he realizes he's a replicant, that's certainly important to it, but also because there's this care that you're talking about that's now being established. It's already developing even before he comes to that realization. And he doesn't even know it then, by the way, right? So he doesn't yet know he's a replicant. I almost get confused about that myself. He doesn't know until he gets the origami unicorn, right? So in that moment, and it's visualized by the kiss. It's not even, well, it is a kiss, where he is standing over her, and it's equal. They're equal in the frame, right? Before that, in the previous love scene, he is standing over her in hierarchically. So I think that's important as well, as that, you know, love, but there's this kind of attitude that's presented here that love is to be on equal terms for it to actually be love, or for that, or empathy, or anything else. And it's so important that you know that lesson is provided by a replicant, by Roy Batty, right? So I don't know if that answers the question, but it's really interesting. I had a lot of things there that I'd like to respond to, but
okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's just go next question. Payman.
Thank you very much. That was great, beyond my understanding. But my question is, why so much emphasis on the love, but I haven't seen so much emphasis on creativity that differentiates human and non-human?
So the lack of emphasis on creativity. Now, you mean in the film?
In the film.
Yeah, lack of emphasis on creativity. And how would you define how would you define creativity in that sense? Like what would you?
Like literature, like art.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. The absence of that in the film. I think that's related to this, this lack of feeling and affect, right? That's the beautiful thing about films, right? When we watch films, we are given a kind of synthetic, perhaps, feeling that we get. But films would be art, good films. Maybe Blade Runner qualifies to this level. But whether it's great literature, paintings, whatever the case is, that in order for it to resonate, I mean, obviously there has to be an intellectual response, but in many cases there needs to be that emotional connection, right? So here's a film that here's a world that has eradicated that element, right, of affect, of feeling. But at the same time, art is also hard to instrumentalize, right? When you do instrumentalize it, you put a price tag on it. Right? And that's what we see more and more of, right? We see, especially the film industry, like we're talking about these movies and how expensive they are, how much money, everyone's talking about how much money they'll make at the box office. If it doesn't make any money at the box office, well, then it's a failure, right? It doesn't matter how good, this film failed at the box office, right? But, whatever was the #1 film in 1982, well, it was E.T., the extraterrestrial. We still talk about that a little bit, but people don't get nearly as excited about E.T. as they do about Blade Runner, right? And so these are the things that we can't put a price on. But at the same time, art also serves to reflection. And so there are three things that are destroyed in this world: empathy, or love, related to empathy, care, affect, and then there is the element of art, and then there's reflection. Okay? And so I think that's something that's implicit in the film, that there is no place for it. That everybody should just be going about their business and for as cheap as possible. Right? Everybody should be working for as cheap as possible. They should be as desperate as they possibly can. They don't have time for art. But it's so that's a really good question.
Okay, Cyrus.
One thing that Heidegger didn't agree with Descartes is that Descartes always mentioned that we are the masters of the world, and Heidegger believed that we're part of the world and that we're within the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we look at this as where Descartes, I'm sure, had an influence in the positivistic attitude that in the 19th century was very prevalent. If you look at it as kind of a manipulation, where, like Chomsky talks about manufactured consent, or like Foucault talks about governmentality, or Althusser, or Eric Fromm, if we talk about that aspect, can we, and I think it's a possibility to think that everybody probably was, what do you call that?
A replicant? Or?
Replicant.
Yeah.
Everybody was a replicant.
Not a Republican. Replicant.
Yeah, replicant. And the four were kind of rebels within replicants.
Yes. Yeah.
Because there was a place in the movie where it said, why didn't you leave Earth? And he said, so he had some reason that he didn't leave Earth. Maybe the real people left Earth, and this is the manufactured consent of everybody being manipulated as like capitalism or powerful people are trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I obviously using, quote, referring to Chomsky's manufacturing consent. I mean, just the word, fits very well here. But so creating a kind of hegemonic control over the system, right? Over the populace that remains, and you would be saying then that they would all be replicants, and this would be part of the false consciousness in a sense.
What if we think of the movie as this is what it's saying. That everybody is a replicant. These are rebels within replicants, and the others have left the Earth.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So we could apply that to a context to maybe like a context that exists today, where we have an ever-growing, widening gap between rich and poor. Tyrell fits in with, obviously is a great embodiment of this, right? That he lives in this pyramid that is separated from everything else. I like that. Like we could look at it from that. This reminds me also another film I'm interested in contrasting or comparing this with is Children of Men, and I was thinking about that with both, particularly your discussion, right? But this idea that you do have this divide, this separation. So you have the wealthy elite at the top. You have this underclass, and so there is an illusion, because I think that this would fit in. The off-world colonies, they can't really get up there, but they're selling this illusion that, hey, you could be part of the 1%.
The American dream.
The American dream, right? Yeah, I like that. That's really interesting. Yeah, so I think that would be consistent with a lot of the the readings for the film. So, but yeah, I like that. And then looking at it, all of us as sort of metaphoric replicants in that sense, awakening from a false consciousness, waking up and saying, let's revolt. Yeah. Okay.
I only saw Behrang and Human's hand. If there was anybody else that wanted, okay, Nassim, Sina, right? I'll just go to Behrang now.
I saw this thing in the movie afterwards that usually the creatures that are designed by humans to be even better than human usually lack that emotion. So, but after time, we see in the movie that they can love each other. You have no reason why not to believe that they can love. So is this suggestion that the movie suggests that you can love without having the emotion, and man is getting having emotion? He wishes he could live without that emotion, more rational, but at the same time he could have love and everything. Is it something that the movie suggests? Is this something that's shown in the literature?
That's interesting. I think that that particular question I didn't see fully addressed, but certainly things that resonate with that. So I would say that the film is suggesting that this idea of the rationality, the instrumental rationality that is the guiding influence of this kind of corporate thinking, that is something that is trying to remove love from the equation, eradicate it, because it makes things more rational in that sense. But then we might question how rational is that rationality, right? And what I mean by that is how rational is it for Tyrell and all of the other sort of uber class to be destroying the planet around them, to be making it so that it's completely uninhabitable, so that there is a place to go, but how stable could that possibly be, like living in an off-world colony, right? So it draws our attention to the limits of that kind of rational thinking, which says that we are masters and we need to have control over everything around us, and let's make sure that we continue to master it, because that allows us to feel stronger in a sense. Now, love would then run contrast to that. Love would go against that. Empathy would go against that. Because if we have real empathy, I think Judith Barrett refers to it as intersubjectivity, right? If we have that intersubjectivity, which means like, to be able to identify with other subjects and see them as subjects, not objects, then it's harder for us to oppress them in that sense, right? In that kind of way. So on one hand, sometimes love it's a messy emotion, right? Sometimes it does get in the way of things, right? But I think the film would suggest that it is not. I think if Stanley Kubrick made the film, I think that might be part of the equation. I think in this film, I think that the love is seen as being redemptive, in that sense, right? That it's something that is necessary. Otherwise, we lose those elements: the creativity, the empathy, and the love itself.
And we still can
and
be
reflection.
emotionless. We can still be emotionless. I believe that replicants can be emotionless
Yeah.
and love at the same time.
Oh, that other question.
They're
That's
open
interesting.
love.
Yeah. Can they be emotionless and love? I think the other element here is that my reading is that it's not that they are emotionless, because as you said, as it goes forward, emotions are things we have to learn, in a sense, or to control those emotions, right? They have been programmed with. I mean, they are our equals. They may be our superiors. So they have emotion. They're beginning to work that out, but as Baran says, they're not mature yet. They haven't reached the point where they are able to fully express them. They're like children at this stage, and they're beginning to learn. And by the end, Batty has achieved this epiphany where he has decided what that level is. What the true value of care is, or empathy. Not that he cares for Deckard, but he needs to leave a statement. He needs to leave a message behind, right? And so what that is that the only way that we can preserve these things, the only way that we can care about them, is if we at some point show mercy, is if we show empathy for the other or demonstrate that.
Okay. All right. I'll just go to Nassim, and I'll have you written down.
Okay. Thanks for your presentation. It was a lovely presentation for a Saturday night. Okay. And I'm trying to connect the sections of your paper together.
Okay. Yeah.
And bring something else.
Good. Okay.
One part you're talking about, I have memory, so I do exist.
Mm-hmm.
This is one part you're talking about.
Yeah.
The other part is talking about the consumerism and the instrumentalist point of view and how they are connected to each other and how they're going to affect the society. But based on what you're talking about, so there is a contradiction. A contradiction in itself, the film in itself. Why? Because I think the memory is again a part of consumerism.
Mm-hmm.
And consume memories, right? So for me, it doesn't exist the fact that I can be human and have memory compared to I'm not human and I don't have a memory. So it's basically the same thing. Like it's a contrary in itself because it talks about the fact that memory also in itself consumed by us.
So yeah.
So I'm just thinking of how you would look at that way if you wanted to look at this, the fact that the basic of this film is about the memory to some extent, and then I just see it as something that it is, and even the eye is not.
The eye.
The eye
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
eye.
yeah,
both of
yeah.
them are looking at it as a fact that it is again consumed by us. Like. I don't know if I could actually send it to you or
absolutely. So I just want to be clear then. So because you're talking about how memory is also consumed.
Yeah.
That we are constantly consuming memory.
Yeah.
In that sense. So you mean in terms of when we reflect on the past, in a sense that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
And it can also be a form of.
And it calls them, and it separates that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It separates people in this sense because it says that okay, if we do have a memory, so we exist and we are human, right? And if we don't have it, then we are not.
Right.
So films are trying to separate us and say what is good, what is bad, huh? It brings us to 2 points. While I think if you're talking about the point of view that you're talking about, the consumerism and the instrumentalism of the point, then then somehow it's contradictory, the film itself.
Yeah, so I think in some ways that could be resolved. The memory, I think the film, now I might be wrong in my interpretation of what you're saying, but I think the film, so stop me if I am, but I think the film is problematizing that idea that memories constitute us or make us who we are. It's challenging that idea, to some extent by saying, and certainly the Marlene Barr essay that I was quoting from and that you guys can take a look at. She challenges that idea very aggressively, right? She says that it's something that yeah, we are, and I think this is what you're alluding to, that we are consuming constructed memories, manufactured memories, right? In that sense, and those are not any more authentic than what the replicants remember, the false memories that are implanted, right? And at the same time, she also goes so far as to say that the memories that we have, I don't know if anyone's familiar with that news story about Brian Williams. The whole ordeal where he lied, essentially lied, but the argument now by a lot of psychologists is that he didn't lie. This was a constructed memory. It's like someone implanted this memory in his head, right? And said, that's almost what's that he was actually, risking his life in a war situation when it turns out he was very, very safe. Right?
Well, Hillary Clinton did the same thing.
Hillary Clinton, right? Yeah.
I
forgot about that.
Ronald Reagan did the same.
Yeah, and then usually
he actually
gets
quoted
forgotten.
right from a movie.
That's right, I forgot about that. So this idea of, is it a lie? Is it, certainly we've all had that experience where we misremember something. And we think that the memory is real and it turns out that it's not. That's what she's bringing our attention to. And then this idea that at the same time that I would carry it forward with Facebook, it reflects this anxiety of having to create a kind of record. I mean, now it's like this lineage. It's like from the birth until, but nobody wants to talk about what happens after, right? It's this denial of death all the way through. We just continue to exist and it will not stop. So I think that would be something that would tie into this memory consumption, right? Because it's like, these are my memories on Facebook. I want you all to share in what I had for dinner yesterday, right? I want you to see that. And sometimes, of course, it has absolutely, no meaning whatsoever. But it does reflect a need to share and a need to, for the person to maybe consume, the way you say, consume those memories. We are consuming memories in a different way. So to me, I don't quite see. I see those things as going together. I see that being part of the sort of consumerist, corporatist aspect, because now we actually have a corporation that Facebook and other, not to pick on Facebook, so other social networking, that actually now shows us how to remember. I mean, we have a generation now that is now, they're teenage, maybe 20 years old. Some of my students that I TA that are 18 or 19 that have, they can't imagine life before Facebook and before categorizing your life according to a prescribed program. I mean, that's really getting close to replicant territory in a way, in a sort of virtual way, right? So I see them as coming together, but I think it's a really, it raises really interesting points about this, how we can carry that even further.
Yeah.
Okay. And just to be a little more careful about the time, so I wanted to have at least half an hour for our own discussion. It's 9:42. We can continue for like 10 minutes, let's say. We have like more than half an hour to do our discussion, let's say 40 minutes. I have two names written down, Sina and Majid, and I hope there is nobody, Uman, hopefully we can get to that as well. Majid?
So I wanted to kind of ask about this idea of the fact that these are coming from kind of the off-board, from the transcendent board,
right,
to some extent.
Yeah.
And so can you see like this replicant as kind of like a messiah figure coming to actually, at the end of the movie, actually, as you pointed out, he actually crucified himself.
Yeah.
And they ended up kind of making up these replicants that didn't really know they were replicants, essentially. So do you see them as this kind of figure, like messiah figure that they crucified for the good of kind of fixing the war? And also, the fact that Tyrell actually implants his niece's memory into this replicant, so essentially kind of subjugating his own family to some extent.
Yeah.
Do you see that as well?
That's very interesting. Yeah. Getting to the first point, because like it was raised earlier, that crucifixion thing, which I don't think I didn't have a chance to get to, and the Messiah aspect of Roy Batty coming back and freeing, in a sense, or attempting to, or to transcend at the very least, right? So there is this Christ figure, sort of imagery that's, that is clearly there, not just the crucifixion, but just the associations, like with the dove and, this more empathetic, merciful, peaceful way of, conversion that he seems to have. But it's also very complicated because of the fact that we could also look at Roy Batty. I mean, one of the other really important influences on that character's construction would be the opposite, in a sense, or which would be Lucifer, Satan, the devil, because somebody mentioned Frankenstein, I think, right? And so there is a major Frankenstein. Obviously, Frankenstein for in the English language literature, very, very influential text, and as for Gothic literature, but also influencing science fiction like this, and the idea of creating life. And but a key influence on Frankenstein was Milton's Paradise Lost. And we see that here, where the idea of the fallen angels, like this is where it's significant that the film is set in Los Angeles, right? Because the city of angels, right? That element. So there is some overlap here, and this idea that perhaps Batty and his gang represent the fallen angels who are rebelling. Because the idea of Lucifer in Paradise Lost, and also in the Bible, the biblical story, is that he rebels. Lucifer rebels, as you know, against God, and but really he's a revolutionary figure from John Milton's point of view, right? That he's presented as a, in Milton's time during the English Civil Wars. Milton was a Republican. I knew there was a reason why I was converted. There you go. So in that sense, that Republican converges with the replicant. But Milton was using, very, very dangerously, you could argue, he was using Lucifer as a model for revolution. And so, getting back to the discussion about manufacturing consent and the idea of overcoming hegemonic control and false consciousness, we could see where it's. I would say, in the most simple way, I would say it's a two-sided coin. You can look at it both ways.
Okay. Last, and then after that, NaMaNa Cinema.
Well, thanks a lot for your lecture. It was really great.
Thank you.
I had two questions. One of them has been already just asked by Nanji, so I skip it. I just wanted to add up to this discussion is that there was another scene which Roy introduced sarcastically himself, introduced the relationship of himself and the Tyrell sarcastically as a father and son relationship. Yeah. And also, we saw Tyrell that has interest of like Chris, actually, sort of. That's So it might add up to the religious thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the other thing is quite minor. We saw also some minor Asian themes in the movie, like images on the billboards, and like some vague Asian voices probably, I'm not sure. And also we saw several times the Japanese origami made by the guy named, I forgot. Was it something deliberate made, of course, by the director? Well, I just want to know your application about
that's important as well. And because there are just so many things to discuss in this film, and that is something that is discussed a lot. There's actually an essay on this if anyone's interested. I can't remember the author's name, but it's called the Asianization of Los Angeles in Blade Runner, right? And so it's not just in the ads. It's not. I mean, if you look, that's the most prominent ethnicity is Asian, right? So Japanese, Chinese, and so on. And so there are numerous interpretations for that. Now, the first, it comes back to the white flight discussion as well, but that doesn't account for why. Because a lot of people have criticized Blade Runner, saying that this is the point that it loses the most. That if anything, it would be Mexican, right? That's obviously the ethnicity that would overrun Los Angeles, and in terms of it's the largest growing population group in California. Fastest growing, I should say. So that aspect, it might be related to the fact that Ridley Scott actually wanted to film this Blade Runner. He actually wanted to shoot it in Hong Kong. And he felt that the Asian cities, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Shanghai, that these cities were actually the most dystopic cities in the world, right? The most nightmarish cities in the world. And so he felt that that's where the future was going. And that was 1981 when he was shooting the film. And we see that since then, the political economic shift has continued to go east. So he was actually quite prescient about that. But beyond that, other than the fact that I know in the novel there is a sense of, similar to the film Children of Men. I don't know, has anyone seen Children of Men?
It's great.
Good, yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, and so, but that film also deals more directly with this idea of, you could refer to it, I mentioned the green zoning of Tyrell's pyramid, and that's sort of an Iraq War reference, right? That it's like, this is the safe zone where you have McDonald's and all these other nice things, and the Gap and everything else, and then people are getting killed outside. That's sort of Tyrell's approach to this, and that's sort of the 1%'s approach in terms of gated communities and everything else. So in that sense, in the movie Children of Men, there is a sense that England is this island that is a relative bastion in the future that is stable, and the rest of the world is trying to crash its gates, right? And that's what it presents, and it's horrifying. Like it's brutal in the way it shows us, and the lack, once again, the lack of care, the lack of empathy that people who are crashing, and the reference to that you made in terms of the Voight-Kampff test being like a sort of immigration test, that certainly played up, you know, like literally in Children of Men, and I think that's very applicable here, and that's where these two films converge. But anyway, this idea that what's probably happening is that the largest population source in the world, Asia, is you know, sort of landing where everyone else is left, you know, and now occupying that space. But yeah, I just thought the Ridley Scott aspect of that he went to film in Hong Kong, I find that really interesting.
Do you have the question? All right.
I have two, but I only ask one of them. Okay. Leave the second one for discussion. So
Suman and I can go on and on for.
Thanks a lot for your talk, and many great points that needs to be more reflected. So just one point on the Descartesian notion, because we had a season also in Heidegger, and Descartes is kind of criticized for this dualistic interpretation. But as you were saying about like the idea of universal subject, so if you read the Descartes in a different way, in a way that Descartes is someone who is trying to break this universal subject idea, that he's not a solipsist per se, but he's trying to say that, I mean, I am like I think therefore I am. So I just want to ask you if we have a different reading of Descartes, in the sense that Descartes is trying to legitimize subjectivity. So, and in this movie, yeah, it is true that, you know, they were kind of manipulated, but like at least, I mean, if you can confirm yourself as a person, then empathy comes in. Yeah. So empathy doesn't come in when you can recognize yourself. So in that sense, if we have a different reading of Descartes, don't you agree that then it could lead to empathy? So because the general criticism to Descartes is a dualistic, whereas I think Descartes was trying to move away from medieval thought of like transcendence in that way and trying to bring it into the human. So what do you think about it?
I knew I would find an offended Cartesian. So that's what I was waiting for. I was goading you. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I think that Descartes is. I look at Descartes. There is a light side and a dark side to Descartes. I see obviously his influence. I'm not discounting Descartes altogether. And that the element that you're talking about is what filters through to you know, to existentialists and Sartre. So that aspect of it, I would say that you know, in terms of subjectifying, you know, subjectivizing the self is very, very, you know, critical, as you said, stepping away from medieval thinking. But the problem is that as Descartes does that, he objectifies those who can't speak for themselves. And I'm not just talking about animals, but animals are. This is the beginning, and this is why I think it is. This is the critique that the film and certainly the book lands, which is that if we are going to look at animals as, you know, as animated machines, what is that line and where does it end, right? I mean, so people, I mean, the obvious, easy answer is, well, it's human and animal, but I mean, is it going to be, you know, are we looking at, you know, primates? Do they not count? Are we looking, you know? our own dogs that we have as pets and cats. And most of us, we would have an approach where we would say, well, those animals that I would like, they deserve special treatment, but everything else should be cast away into this into this category of the animated machine. Beyond that, it's also very culturally specific. And I think it does come back to the universal subject. It's culturally specific in the sense that you have to be culturally initiated to think that way. What if you aren't? What if you don't? Does that discount you in a sense? And we've seen this way of thinking that goes beyond animal. We see it becomes so that that we define people who do not correspond to that way of thinking, or people that we simply don't like, we remove their humanity from them. That's the dark side of Descartes from my point of view. But also, that's also something that that I think the film and especially the book is really trying to hammer home.
Okay, thank you very much again. So now we enter into our discussion. You could